The Economist.
Hello and welcome to The Intelligence from The Economist. I'm Rosie Blore.
And I'm Jason Palmer. Every weekday, we provide a fresh perspective on the events shaping your world.
Blood plasma is used in ever more medical treatments. There's just one problem. We don't have enough of it. Our correspondent has come up with a few ideas about how to get the blood gushing forth.
And traditional Yoruba weddings in Nigeria involve a tremendous amount of planning and time and money. So as a cost of living crisis bites harder and harder, we ask how the nuptials are being stripped back a bit. First up, though, at the very start of last night's election debate with Donald Trump, Vice President Kamala Harris took the initiative, striding across the stage to shake his hand.
Kamala Harris, what's up? Good debate.
Nice to see you. Have fun.
Thank you.
It was a move that seemed to put Mr. Trump on the back foot, which is more or less where he spent the rest of the debate.
Kamala Harris needed to demonstrate tonight that she was up to the job of being president of the United States, and I think that she more than pulled it off.
James Bennett writes Lexington, our column on American politics, and spoke to me shortly after the debate had finished.
Donald Trump had a lot less to prove, and against that low bar, he demonstrated that he's the same old Donald Trump that America has come to know and some have come to love.
And let's talk through some sort of key moments that bear that out. What really stuck out in your mind?
I think what was really striking to me was the sort of the pattern of the whole debate, which is that Vice President Harris was almost toying with Donald Trump. She just kept pricking his vanity, his ego, and getting him to spend his time defending his own record, his own self-image, rather than doing what he certainly had ample material to do, which is to go after her for her own record and for the record of the administration of which she's been a part for 3.5 years. The example that really set that pattern for me was just about a half hour into the debate when the moderator asked Vice President Harris a very direct and even aggressive question, basically, why did it take you guys 3.5 years before you did anything to secure the southern border? And she gave a really interesting answer in which she didn't address the question at all.
So I'm the only person on this stage who has prosecuted transnational criminal organizations for the trafficking of guns, drugs, and human beings.
She talked about her own experience as a prosecutor, cracking down on people smuggling. She accused Donald Trump of having sunk a bipartisan bill to strengthen the border, which he did.
Donald Trump got on the phone, called up some folks in Congress, and said, kill the bill. And you know why? Because he'd prefer to run on a problem instead of fixing a problem.
And then, sort of incidentally, out of the blue, she invites the audience to attend a Trump rally where she says Donald Trump will say all these crazy things.
It's a really interesting thing to watch. You will see during the course of his rallies, he talks about fictional characters like Hannibal Lecter. He will talk about windmills cause cancer. And what you will also notice is that people start leaving his rallies early out of exhaustion and boredom.
And then she delivers what seems to be the important line.
And I will tell you, the one thing you will not hear him talk about is you.
Now, of course, you can guess what line Donald Trump then responded to when he had the opportunity to rebut her.
First, let me respond as to the
Please.
rallies. She said people start leaving. People don't go to her rallies. There's no reason to go. And the people that do go, she's bussing them in and paying them to be there, and then showing them in a different light. So she can't talk about that. People don't leave my rallies. We have the biggest rallies, the most incredible rallies in the history of politics.
I mean, it's all well and good that Ms. Harris found a way to goad Mr. Trump, I suppose. But what about policy stuff? What were the real standout moments where these candidates talked about real stuff?
Yeah, Jason, I can't say that there was a deep exploration of alternative visions of policymaking that came out of this debate. Kamala Harris, who has not put together a very detailed platform to run on, cited several times a few specific policies, including an enhanced tax credit for children and effort to help first-time home buyers, all of which she described as being part of her vision for an opportunity economy.
Because here's the thing. We know that we have a shortage of homes and housing, and the cost of housing is too expensive for far too many people. We know that young families need support to raise their children, and I intend on extending a tax cut for those families of $6,000.
But it was really pretty thin gruel. In this debate, though, she was the one who was constantly trying to bring it back to policy discussion, simply because Donald Trump so completely failed to outline a very specific agenda, other than returning again and again to the idea that America was destroyed and he was going to save it.
Our country is being lost. We're a failing nation. And it happened 3.5 years ago. And what's going on here, you're going to end up in World War III.
The moderators, for example, pressed Donald Trump on health care. He said as president he was going to do away with Obamacare, and he promised to replace it with a superior plan, one that would be far less expensive and deliver far better care. But he has yet, as the moderators note, many years later, to actually describe that plan. And so they asked him yet again, well, do you have that plan? And he gave what I think even the most ardent Trump supporter might acknowledge was a pretty unsatisfactory answer.
I have concepts of a plan. I'm not president right now. But if we come up with something, I would only change it if we come up with something that's better and less expensive.
We often seem to be longing to be debating Joe Biden again, and he kept referring to Joe Biden. But when he did manage to go after Kamala Harris herself a couple of times, he tried to paint her as a radical lefty, and she is vulnerable politically to that charge.
She's a Marxist. Everybody knows she's a Marxist. Her father's a Marxist professor in economics, and he taught her well.
And then he returned to it late in the debate by suddenly stating that she planned to take away everybody's guns. She seemed more than ready for an accusation like that.
This business about taking everyone's guns away, Tim Walz and I are both gun owners. We're not taking anybody's guns away. So stop with the continuous lying about this stuff.
In the run-up to this debate, much of the discussion was around learning more about Kamala Harris and her plans and policies. I wonder if we actually learned anything at all about Donald Trump.
I think we had a number of things confirmed about Donald Trump. One of those things is just that he's not a good debater. I mean, this is not a good format for him. He's often at his most incoherent in these settings. Trump wouldn't let himself be pinned down on Ukraine. He wouldn't say whether he wanted Ukraine to win the war.
Do you believe it's in the U.S. best interest for Ukraine to win this war, yes or no?
I think it's the U.S. best interest to get this war finished and just get it done.
When he was pressed on whether he would have done anything differently in retrospect on January 6th, when the Capitol was attacked by a mob of supporters of Mr. Trump who were trying to overturn the election, he basically repeatedly dodged the question with a question of his own that I think some viewers were probably sympathetic to.
One of the people that burned down Minneapolis is going to be prosecuted, or in Seattle. They went into Seattle. They took over a big percentage of the city of Seattle. When are those people going to be prosecuted?
Even if you concede those points that more should have been or should be done, it still begs the question of, well, why would he think it's okay for people to storm the Capitol of the United States? He will continue to insist that the 2020 election was stolen from him, despite all evidence to the contrary, as he did again tonight, even when repeatedly pressed by the moderators.
In the past couple of weeks leading up to this debate, you have said, quote, you lost by a whisker, that you, quote, didn't quite make it, that you came up a little bit short.
I said that?
Are you now acknowledging that you lost in 2020?
No, I don't acknowledge that at all.
But
I said that sarcastically. You know that. It was said, oh, we lost by a whisker. That was said sarcastically. Look, there's so much proof. All you have to do is look at it.
What seems to me, and I think to many people, is outright falsehood that's corrosive to the basic institutions of American governance strike his supporters as legitimate grievance.
This was another thing much discussed before the debate, which was, would it matter at all? To your mind, has this changed anything? Does it move any relevant needles?
Well, conventional wisdom has certainly been for a long time that debates don't matter much. That conventional wisdom was somewhat shaken by Joe Biden's debate with Donald Trump on June 27th, which obviously had tremendous impact on the course of this campaign. I don't think this debate is going to have that kind of impact by any means. The reality is that polls showed Hillary Clinton pretty easily won all three of her debates with Donald Trump in 2016. And as we all know, he went on to win that election. A difference here is that Kamala Harris is still not that well known. And it might be that enough swing voters like what they saw. But, Jason, it's very early in terms of processing the results of this. And so I want to be humble about venturing any real guess as to what the outcome or the effect of this will be.
That is fair enough, James. I recognize that you're probably in need of some sleep by this hour, but we will be hearing more from you on Checks and Balance this week, right?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to chewing this over with our U.S. editor, John Prideaux, and who I think is interested in the question of how this debate will factor into the conduct of the rest of the campaign.
I will be tuning in for sure. For now, James, thanks very much.
Thank you, Jason.
We use blood as a metaphor for many things. The arteries are a road network, the clot in a system, a vein of work. But today we're talking about actual blood and how we trade it. Plasma is the main component of blood. It's not something most of us think about very often, but it's crucial for making a range of medicines and vaccines. Unfortunately, it's rather scarce. And that's not something we should be sanguine about.
Plasma is so important because it's an essential medicine and doctors are finding more and more uses for it.
Amelia Wood writes for The Economist.
The typical usage has been to treat patients with blood disorders, like treatments for haemophiliacs, but also to make vaccinations like rabies and tetanus vaccinations. And doctors are finding more and more uses beyond this as well. But there are many cases in which demand is outstripping supply and supply cannot keep up.
So you say that demand is outstripping supply. Can you put some numbers on that? Give me a sense of the scale.
In countries like the UK and Canada, they're almost entirely dependent on imported plasma. It is also true in Europe that they have a shortage and rely on imported plasma to meet the demands of their patients. Studies have also shown that even with those imports, they could be using a lot more plasma than they currently are. The situation is also much worse in poorer countries, which can't even get enough plasma to treat the needs of even their sickest patients. So you can read reports of haemophilia patients going untreated and so forth.
Why are some countries overflowing with blood plasma?
The simple answer is that they're happy to pay for it. It seems like a squeamish thing to do, and understandably people get and countries get uncomfortable with the idea that you should pay people to open their veins. But ultimately, for what is a process where you need to go and sit in a chair for an hour, quite frequently as well, in order to meet the demands of these medicines. So it can take hundreds of donations of plasma to make some of these medicines to treat a patient for a year.
And which countries pay people for plasma donations, and how much do they pay?
America is by far the biggest outsource of plasma. But there are other countries too that are involved in the market. So you get 4 EU countries, Germany, the Czech Republic, Austria, and Hungary. But by far it's America, and it's simply because America has the least restrictions on companies paying people to donate plasma. It's pretty uncapped. They can pay different amounts according to supply. So particularly during the pandemic, when donors were much more unwilling to go and donate because of health concerns, the amount that companies would then pay to get people in chairs skyrocketed. Europe is a little bit more squeamish about those sorts of things. There are caps on payments to make it more proportional to the minimum wage, and bans on advertising and so forth, even in those countries that do allow paid donation.
And sitting in Britain, where we've had blood scandals, we've had mad cow disease, are there concerns about the safety of donating plasma and using donated plasma or using plasma that's been bought?
One of the reasons countries are reluctant to allow patients to be paid for plasma is because of safety concerns, right? There's this worry that if you pay for plasma, then people are likely to go and donate even if they're ill, and more infected blood could get into the system and risk patients' lives. Plasma can be extremely heavily screened and processed, and it actually means the process is a lot more akin to pasteurizing milk. Not only can you screen the cows, if you like, to make sure they're free of disease, but you can also do all sorts of chemical and heat treatments and other types of processes in order to make sure it's safe for patients. Britain did not collect any plasma for about 20 years after mad cow disease broke out in the 90s because there were quite serious fears that it could get into the blood supply and infect patients that would be treated with plasma products, because mad cow disease is a particular kind of disease that's very difficult to screen out of blood, unlike most other diseases. And they've only just started to resume domestic collection of plasma in the past couple of years. So in that case, it shows that health authorities can make good decisions, and this isn't all or nothing. There are sometimes very good reasons why you shouldn't collect at home. But for the most part, for most countries, it's a good idea.
So if you're relying on imported blood, aren't you relying on blood plasma that anyway has been paid for? And it's deeply hypocritical to say you won't pay your own citizens for their blood plasma.
If you're relying on countries which do pay for plasma, you're essentially putting your eggs in their basket rather than your own. And while some countries are quite happy to do that, there is always the risk that if something like mad cow disease broke out in America, for example, suddenly that would have very large ramifications on the global supply of these medicines. But it is, as you say, also deeply hypocritical. The French, for example, at one moment, their blood authority will write letters to the EU saying that they don't support liberalising paid donation for plasma across Europe, stating that it's a commodity, already a reality in the United States. So they're pretty blunt in their lack of support. But at the same time, the French state is the sole shareholder in a company which operates paid-for plasma centres in America.
Are we going to see a change in paying for plasma?
The EU has spent the last 2 years considering its regulations on plasma and arrived at something of a halfway house. They've essentially acknowledged that the existing countries which pay for plasma donation can carry on doing so, but make these acknowledgements like a ban on advertising, but also a cap on how much you can pay tied to the minimum wage. But they've not gone any further. Some countries like Canada and Greece have already made noises in the direction of allowing more paid donation. But ultimately, for patients, the question is, will they do it soon enough? And will enough countries do that too?
Amelia, thanks so much for talking to me.
Thank you.
In Nigeria, Yoruba weddings can last for months, not just days.
Ore Ogunbiyi is an Africa correspondent for The Economist.
Firstly, you've got a small party when the families are introduced to each other for the first time. Then, you've got another one that tends to be much bigger, which is for the traditional marriage rites. That's when the groom's family presents presents to the bride's family. That's everything from yams to fine jewelry, typically some kind of religious book. And then there's a third event, which is usually the religious ceremony and the reception. The betrothed can cycle through over 10 bespoke outfits during the entire celebrations. But as the cost of living crisis begins to bite, people across Nigeria are having to learn how to party on the cheap. Merciful God. For the couple, it's probably helpful if you can cram all these events into a single day. Even if you do insist on the myriad of costume changes regardless, that at least saves you on venue fees and maybe some catering. For your entertainment, perhaps you don't need the Grammy Award-nominated King Sunny Ade to perform his Juju classics live, just like the one you're hearing now, called Merciful God. A tribute band should probably sound fine enough from the dance floor.
Merciful God.
Nima.
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm fine. You look lovely.
Thank you.
As part of my reporting, I went to visit a fabric shop run by a woman called Mrs. Remy Williams, and she sells some pretty pricey aso-ebi. which in Yoruba means cloth of the kin. And guests usually buy matching asoebi from the couple's families, not just so that guests invited from each family can look the same, but also it helps raise money to pay for the pretty pricey wedding. During our interview, someone rang her up about a fabric that costs $500.
Sourcing for fabrics is so much more expensive now in every single way. Pay top dollar for the fabrics, and then even to get them in, cost of freighting is crazy. People are still buying fabrics, but not like before anymore.
The thing is with asoebi, you kind of need to buy a new set for every single event. Someone decides they want a stripy mauve and periwinkle one, but if you can repurpose your kind of pinkish and bluish one from the wedding that you went to last year, do you really need to buy another set? Now, when it comes to food, a very important part of Nigerian weddings, the waiter might be taking your order from a slightly shorter menu. You used to have a plethora of options, but now you'll be lucky if you find a continental option that still includes king prawns and not shrimp. You used to have lots of different caterers, one doing the amala, which is like a yam-based dish that's normally reserved for people who have space for seconds. You'd have a separate caterer doing small chops like the spring rolls and samosas. But now you can save if you find one caterer who can just do it all. For those hoping to wash it all down with a glass of the finest champagne, it helps if you bring your own and just keep it in a cool box under your table. Because even if they are serving champagne, it's not by the bottle anymore, it's by the glass. Last year, there was a chaotic currency redesign in Nigeria, which means that cash is still kind of hard to come by. The act of spraying celebrants, which is basically smothering them in crisp naira notes as they dance, has become a bit less common. Although this might have more to do with the fact that a recent high-profile conviction actually reminded Nigerians that spraying is illegal. Not only is spraying less common, but because Nigeria is a lot more cashless, you'll find agents with point-of-sales machines who just sidle onto the dance floor to help those people who still want to offer a discreet financial gift to the couple. Years ago, wedding guests would stagger out of the venue at the end of the night. They'd be weighed down by kettles and coolers and 3-tier food steamers, all kinds of souvenirs, even mobile phones that are all blazoned with stickers bearing the couple's names and a happy married life. But today, the party favors are more likely to be things like small bags of rice, oil, and maybe some pasta. More modest gifts, but arguably more welcome ones in this economy.
That's all for this episode of The Intelligence. We'll see you back here tomorrow.